Hi, I'm Nick Holland, the Director of Research at Liminal. Since 2016, we have offered objective, high-impact strategic advice and analytical services, helping to support clients in crucial business decisions at all stages of the product and business lifecycle. The digital identity industry is evolving, and so are we. One World Identity is now Liminal. So what we do? Growth strategy. We custom tailor our proprietary go-to-market methodology to each client's needs and goals, whether starting from day zero or assisting through post-launch. Transaction services. We work closely with buyers and sellers as they evaluate and execute corporate transactions. And market intelligence. We decode the industry landscape by analyzing how companies, products, and global regulations influence market evolution and product roadmaps. And now, welcome to the Thesis. Today I'm speaking with Stephen Teppler. Stephen is partner and chair of Cybersecurity and Privacy at Sterlington, PLLC, partner of Mandelberg Salzburg, and a lecturer on electronic discovery and cybersecurity with Nova Southeastern Law School. Stephen, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Nick. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So, what we're going to talk about today is age-appropriate design code, or AADC, as it's known in some circles. There's been a lot of information or news alerts recently around age verification for a number of websites and clearly what they're doing in that space. I think one of the reasons underlying that is probably AADC, which went into effect actually last week on September the 2nd. I think my thesis going into this is that a lot of companies are going to be very surprised by this. It's been flying very much under the radar. And given that it's a regional specific regulation, it's a UK based. But I think a lot of companies, as I say, are going to be surprised by this. And there's some fairly alarming punitive measures that go along with this. So Stephen, first of all, can we just maybe start by, could you just define AADC for me, please?
It's a data sharing code, or the latest in what is the evolution of data sharing code. And basically, unlike California's Consumer Privacy Act, unlike Gdpr in most instances, what this does is it requires the process internally of a website to comport itself with prospective children of various ages who may visit the website. So it is a much more intrusive, if you will, regulation or law that is pretty much not been very well recognized today.
No, it's fascinating. I mean, again, if you do a Google search for AADC at the moment, you'll come up with a load of other acronyms that have nothing to do with it. And it's unless you start getting very specific around AADC UK regs, that's how you get the search to come up. So it's really quite alarming how under the radar this is over here. But it's again, I think certainly some of the things we've seen about it are requiring obviously this age screening at a code level, but it's fairly far-reaching. So maybe you could talk through some of the permutations of the actual law here.
The online services that are covered by the code include applications, games, connected toys and devices, and news services. Those categories alone should strike fear into the hearts of the web designers and policymakers behind big tech and even smaller to medium enterprises, because of the recognition that they'll have to make of what impact that application or game or connected toy and device, which I think is especially troublesome, poses for them. If you think about connected toys and how many millions of them are out there, how cheaply generally they're made, and how they really aren't designed to provide privacy or security, they're just designed to transmit and receive information. It makes for a fairly daunting requirement on these manufacturers and the vendors as well, I presume.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty hard to put the genie back in the bottle at this point. If I remember rightly, I read something like there's something in the region of 20 million connected doorbells in the US already. So I imagine the number of toys out there with some form of data collection or communications capability is probably a lot higher than that.
We were involved, in fact, with the first IoT class action suit in California that I can remember, and that had to do with a talking doll made by a very, very, very large toy manufacturer that recorded the recorded statements of the user of the doll or the holder of the doll, whoever communicated with it, and then sent it back to a back-end AI server that formulated what were supposed to be appropriate responses. What was interesting about it is that the parents of the children were required to consent to the monetization of the recordings that were made by the children. This would fly in the face of age-appropriate design code.
Clearly, I mean, clearly that is kind of an egregious privacy impasse there, I would say. I mean, that's maybe on one end of the spectrum. I think that there seems to be this very large area of, I'd say, services that fall under AADC that are not, it's not necessarily services that are designed for children, but it's that children may access. I mean, that seems particularly problematic as well.
That's true, but I think that the way that that it's coded, the way that the law is structured, it applies to UK-based companies as well as non-UK-based companies who process the personal data of UK children. So that and from there it makes some differentiations between age groups and the amount of attention or the degree of attention or notification you have to make to any particular of those age groups.
So, as I said, it went into effect September the 2nd, I believe. Not coincidentally, the same day that WhatsApp was hit with a 225 million euro fine for GDPR breaches or GDPR non-compliance, rather. Am I correct in saying that AADC fits within the overall punitive measures of GDPR in terms of data privacy? That's correct, isn't it?
That is correct.
So if you're not compliant with AADC, it's as bad, potentially as 4% of revenues, or I believe 20 million euro in terms of the repercussions of being non-compliant.
That is strangely similar to GDPR's more stringent, more strict penalties.
Yeah. So it does have teeth, and clearly, I think, again, it's no coincidence that WhatsApp was hit the same day as this went into effect. So I think there's the clear connecting of the dots there being made. Maybe talk a little bit about, I mean, if those are the repercussions for non-compliance. I'm just, how do you really screen for the age of a child, though? I mean, again, you're dealing with children. Children are not known necessarily, myself included in this, as a child. If anything that was age restricted, I would try to break into. That's a lot easier when you're not in person. You just have to check a box saying, hey, I'm 18. That's clearly not sufficient these days. So, but how do you identify someone as an adult versus a child?
It's very difficult. You could possibly make an argument for some sort of AI to be able to detect patterns of speech or behavior that are more likely than not to be those of a child or a child of a certain age. But really, it's still a matter of trust. I frankly do not, I do not think that it is I don't think it's reasonable to be able to say we can, with any kind of definitive certainty, say that this is a child of a certain age, unless you're looking at a game for children. The very obvious services for children are probably much easier to understand, but if you have a child that's looking up certain definitions in a biology class, which seems to indicate, which involves, how mating occurs or other things that might be considered of more adult nature. How do you prepare for that? How do you ascertain that it's a child who's doing that research rather than a graduate student? It is, I think it's a really, really, really great challenge.
It's a nest of vipers for sure. I mean, I guess the other thing as well is you've got some contradictory forces here. So you want to be able to verify to a certain level of assurance that a child is a child, but also you can't infringe on their privacy rights either. So if you wanted to definitively define them as a child, you'd be collecting information that might be inappropriate to be collecting.
And you might have a double confirmation that you are not, a child under the age of 18 or under the age of 16. But in the end, there's no CAPTCHA for determining childhood age.
Right. There isn't. No, you're right. There isn't a Turing test for children yet.
Yeah. And I tend, it's hard enough. We're still struggling with whether or not AI will ever gain sentience. Much less trying to figure out whether. And how would we know, for instance, whether a child of 17.99 years is accessing a site versus a child 2 hours later that may be considered an adult?
So, I mean, there's also, I guess, the conundrum of, a lot of these are nuances of age as well. So it's, under 13 or under 15 or whatever. It's not a binary, are you or are you not 18 in some circumstances. It is, I guess, for this specific regulation, but there are nuances that will be even more difficult to parse out here.
One thing that comes to mind also is that the identification of children as users or visitors to your website is probably going to result in the aggregation of a huge database of children, which, if ever is compromised, could cause just immeasurable harm.
Yeah. So I guess, what are you advising clients to do at this point in time? If you're dealing with, I guess, predominantly US companies, is this seen as potentially a template for age verification, as GDPR was seen as maybe a template for some of the US regulations that came later on? Or is it kind of a moot point at this point?
No, I think you're on the right track. I think you have to look at it as a compliance issue. You have to you have to be able to demonstrate that you walk the talk. And how are you going to walk the talk? You do, in the end, the best you can. Do what's reasonable, do what's defensible. In security, we never talk about perfection. We talk about defensible security, commercially reasonable security. Right. What steps have you taken that won't require a telepathic ability to ascertain someone's age, to be reasonably assured that the individual who is accessing or using your website is age appropriate, and that you've made resources available to accommodate that person. Similar to, I guess, an ADA and Americans with Disabilities Act accommodation effort.
You're right. It's not a binary. It's. I think the word reasonable is absolutely the correct word to use here. It's showing an intent to comply to the best of your ability without again resorting on telepathy or tarot cards.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
And and in advising a client will look at me and say, how is it that I can ever be able to comply? And again, what I tell them is that it is your best effort. You have to demonstrate that you've at least tried, maybe hired a consultant, maybe redo your privacy policy, maybe add a couple of opt-ins or opt-outs or confirmation dialog boxes that basically, perhaps within the first 5 minutes or 2 minutes of accessing a website, please confirm that you are under the age of 18, or please confirm, you would first say, this website is designed for individuals over the age of 18 or between the ages of 15 and 18. If you are not, please leave immediately, or confirm that you are of age appropriate status to use this website. I don't know what more you can do. You're presented with the same conundrum under the GDPR, where you're supposed to verify a requester's identity, or under the CCPA. How do you verify bits and bytes? It is without further privacy intrusion by requiring a registration and some sort of identity vetting, and then perhaps a dual authentication. What do you do?
With the irony being that, again, this is privacy-oriented regulation that's intended to protect privacy better. I mean, it's a little Kafkaesque, maybe.
It is not only Kafkaesque, but it also creates an incredible kind of circular dependency.
Right.
You can't protect without increasing your risk by gathering information so that you increasingly protect. Ad infinitum.
It's certainly, it keeps the identity industry well monetized, I guess.
Just will be well employed.
Just one final question. I mean, we sort of alluded to this in the beginning, Stephen. It's
Sure.
when GDPR occurred, it was huge news. It was absolutely massive. In fact, we met at the RSA conference that it went live that year. I think it was kind of, other than AI and ML being kind of the acronyms du jour, GDPR was the other one. Everything, there was so many conversations about GDPR. This is, again, it's completely swept under the rug as far as I can tell. I don't understand why, a regulation with such far-reaching implications is really getting so little fanfare.
If I had to put on my sociologist's hat, and I'm not a sociologist, but I'll pretend to be one for the moment, I think there are other exigent circumstances going on. You've got, the perennial COVID problem. You've got political issues going on over in the UK. I think you're still suffering from Brexit in a way that's causing supply shortages. So I think there are other issues that are sucking up all the available bandwidth at the moment. I do think this is still under the radar, but I also believe that it will emerge as a major issue in the coming months.
Well, I mean, good to speak with you about it. I'd love to maybe revisit this topic as it becomes maybe more problematic for us locally here in the US, but it's certainly have appreciated your insights, Stephen. So thank you very much today for that. That's Stephen Teppler, attorney, and I'm Nick Holland. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you're interested in learning more or working with us, please reach out at info@liminal.co.